All right, welcome. We have been waiting for this for so long, haven't we? It literally has been decades. And I want to echo everything that Kevin has said. You cannot do this alone. You have to have a garden team. And Liz, you have been exceptional from the very beginning. But we've had a team put together for over 10 years. And in fact, Liz, Jim Kelsey, Betsy White, Jay Cantor, and Arita Warren from our advisory board. I mean, we have had a lot of people helping. Even Lori Fontanas came to a meeting a number of years ago. I mean, the board has been so involved. So I really want a round of applause for our board and our advisory board. They spanned a decade. They've helped raise money. Michael, Jean, you're here. You know, Michael has institutional memory about this place back when it was owned by the Devereaux in the 1960s. He was actually able to introduce us to people who had archival photos of the place. You know, and that's how we were able to put the gardens back together. You know, so everybody's had a piece. The volunteers, the staff. Luthia, welcome. I also want to mention partnerships. When this first started, I was very lucky because someone introduced me to Betsy Barlow Rogers, who actually was responsible for the restoration of Central Park. And they said, you know what? You need to meet her, because if she can turn Central Park around, you can turn this dump around too. But you need to talk to her first. And she looked at me and she said, and she like sort of sized me up, and she's like, you know what you need? I'm like money? And she's no. And it's one of the things that Kevin mentioned. She's like, you need passion. And I was like, yes, I've got that. She goes, okay, you need perseverance. And I was like, yeah, I've got that. And then she looked at me, she goes, and you need patience. And I know right now you do not have that. And I was like, I was so demoralized. And she was like, you have no idea. And so I had to find patience. And yes, it has been 10 to 15 years, no matter how many you count. But more importantly, she left out one really important P, which was partnerships. And I cannot underscore how important partnerships are. And we have had partnerships with the African American Men of Westchester, members who are here tonight, the American Women of African Heritage, Rye Sustainability, Rye Garden Club, Little Garden Club, you name it. All of these different community organizations that really came to write letters and volunteer and put their voices behind ours when we said, we can take this on. We can take this, dilapidated place and turn it into something beautiful. So we are lucky with the weather. I don't want to make a very long speech, but I do just want to say a little bit about our team, because assembling a team, as Kevin said, it's the board, it's the staff. We have an amazing board and staff. It's the volunteers who are incredible. And by the way, they've climbed on that arbor. That rose arbor, it looks as good because they only had 1 or 2 glasses of wine when they climbed on the arbor, but because they have lovingly taken care of it. But we have what is an exceptional design. And when we went to look for a landscape architecture firm that understood what we were about cultural heritage, about telling all the stories, not just the story of John Jay, although it's like a really important story. He was one of the negotiators of the Treaty of Paris. It's why we have the government and the nation and the freedom that we have today, but also because he abolished slavery in New York State, but he also owned enslaved people. And those men and women worked in these gardens. And let me tell you something, you got up at 6:30 or 7 in the morning or even earlier, and you're in these gardens, and you can feel their spirits as you dig in the weeds, and you are there, and you're looking at a landscape not that different from what they looked like, what they looked at. And so to find a firm, a team led by Thomas and Charlotte Barrows and Mark Strider, who are here with us tonight, who understood that we had to tell all the stories, and at the same time, simultaneously, what a challenge. Did we want to create a Williamsburg garden? I love colonial Williamsburg, but that was not for us. We wanted these gardens to be useful, sustainable, outdoor classrooms where we could invite Brent Leggs from the National Trust to come speak, or Michael Twitty, who's got this phenomenal Kosher Soul cookbook. If you haven't read it or gotten it, get it. He's Jewish, he's gay, he knows all about Black cooking and food and culture, and he's actually going to come speak and cook from our gardens this fall. I mean, these aren't just pretty things to look at flowers. They are active, dynamic spaces, and we couldn't have done that without Thomas, Charlotte, and Mark. Very briefly, I just want to tell you a little bit about how amazing they are. They've done projects from Hudson Yards in Manhattan to the Flight 93 Memorial in Pennsylvania. They've done the Brooklyn Naval Cemetery, which incorporates the fact that there are numerous burials there as well. There is a sensitivity to narrative. There's a sensitivity to culture that we didn't think we could find anywhere else. And so we were so happy to work with them. I want to also add, we're adding a speaker to the list because we got you here, you're captive. Larry Weiner, who designed our native meadow, and if any of you were able to see the gorgeous white penstemon, hairy beard tongue, blue spiderwort. I mean, this meadow has come alive with birds and butterflies. I have to do an aside. Our gardens in our meadow are so healthy that just this week, in fact, even just today, like 2 days ago, we had a snapping turtle laying eggs next to the vegetable beds, a little disarming. We had a coyote in the gardens this morning. I mean, that's healthy. You don't get that with pesticides. So anyway, so Larry, you don't. So Larry designed our meadow, and the meadow and the garden speak to each other. And so we're going to hear a little bit from Larry tonight after Thomas speaks. But Thomas and his firm, they've been named to Elle Decor's top 10 landscape firms. They do things from New Zealand to DC. And I met you through the Cultural Landscape Foundation, which really understands landscapes too. But I'm not going to take advantage of this beautiful weather. I just want to introduce Thomas, who's going to tell you about the design of these exceptional gardens and what the process was. Thomas.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here this evening. It's really, really a pleasure to be here and celebrate this incredible moment. We have been talking about this for a very long time, and it has taken all of the P's and more P's to come. And thank you, Suzanne, for your incredible and constant leadership. It's been extraordinary for us to be your thought partner in pulling this garden off. I also want to reiterate the work of Charlotte Barrows, Mark Streeter, Aaron Percival in our office, and Matthew Seibert, who was also part of this team. It has spanned kind of a generation in our office, actually. So I'm going to walk you through this process, but I want to introduce it by telling you just a tiny bit about ourselves and how this project fits into our values as a practice. We firmly believe that the soil we stand on, the soil we occupy, it's full. Whenever I hear someone say, oh, there's empty space, open space, the site is tabula rasa, there's nothing there, it's just not true. There's always something there. Whether it's the geologic history of the retreat of the glacial ice sheet, whether it's the first Native American occupation of this continent, whether it's the colonial settlements and arrivals, the beginning of industry, the enslavement of other humans, there are stories, beautiful and hideous, in the land beneath our feet. And it becomes our moral duty to excavate and reveal those stories as we find them. We live in an extraordinary time where we get to tell the truth, and it feels good. It feels good, and it's hard work because everyone's not ready. And so places like this site are leading the way in a new kind of preservation. I wanted to just mention a couple of the projects on the books. One is the Hagley Crown and Shield Garden in Wilmington, Delaware. And that's an interesting one where it was actually sort of closed off to the public and not maintained because it didn't fit within the singular mission of Hagley, which was the Museum of American Industry. And what we're finding is that right now, the public is quite happy to hear multiple complex and layered narratives because I think more than maybe 50 years ago, we realize how complicated the world is and that there isn't a singular narrative. So we're hopeful to begin the restoration of this garden soon. This is a very big week for the Jay Heritage Site, but also for MBW. Friday night, I'll be with the descendants of the enslaved people of Monticello to reconsecrate the burial ground at Monticello that our firm has designed the restoration of. And then the next morning on Saturday, we have the public ceremony of opening the burial ground once again to the public. So it's a very exciting moment. And then there are other places like Filoli. This is one of the National Trust properties that we've been working on. And there again, expanding the narratives beyond a mansion and its formal garden to start to talk about the Native American occupation of the peninsula of below, just south of San Francisco, the water history of San Francisco. It all began at Filoli, and these narratives almost don't exist. In the center of the screen is one of my favorite long-term projects, Olana, working also with the state parks of New York on restoring Frederick Church's, as he wrote, his most magnificent painting. He considered that his greatest work of art, the landscape that he designed and built at Olana. I want to also mention that in the audience is Victoria Johnson, who's currently writing a biography of Frederick Church. And it's been exciting to have a great scholar digging in even more deeply to bring Church to the public. So these projects start as restoring something or as a typical landscape project, but then they start to open up all kinds of different worlds. So I want to walk you through the process for this garden. I've listed the landscape committee that Suzanne just ran us through, but also the folks at New York State Parks, the Division for Historic Preservation, and the Westchester County Parks Department. Everyone's voice was essential to getting this project to happen. You're seeing the rendering of the gardens. It took a while to get here. We had to figure out what are the appropriate narratives of each garden. So let me walk you through that, but also I want to cite us within Long Island Sound, or the Devil's Belt. How do you like that on that map? Can you see it? Just below the Sound, and then it says called also the Devil's Belt. And the blue circle is where we are. And you have to also imagine the sweeping view from the mansion all the way to the Sound. So you would have had this big open view of water. So the first images that we were studying from 1745 to 1822 were really a testament to the length of time that the Jay family was farming. This was an agricultural site. These images show you the big open fields, gardens. You can see in the upper left one the beginnings of this long linear garden, and you can see the traces of the ha-ha wall that was begun by Peter Augustus Jay under the direction of his father, John Jay. And then at the bottom, you're seeing the ha-ha wall in the state it was when we began this project. Moving a little later, from 1823 all the way to the 1904 era, we called this era the country estate era. It's moving from agricultural production to more of a pleasure garden. You're seeing the appearance of the A.J. Davis Pavilion that was built in 1849 on Cherry Hill, that was right behind you on this tent. It was the gardening shed. But it was placed axially on this high point, and you can start to see in this map this long processional axis and the garden beds. So because we weren't restoring to any single period, we're mining all this research, maps, letters, recollections, and then later photographs for what will be the kit of parts for this new garden. But this kit of parts doesn't land from outer space. It actually grows from a research process. So room 1, we're calling the parterre garden. You're seeing these photographs of it in its heyday with the box edging, more formalized plantings. Again, this is a pleasure estate under the Van Noorden family from 1904 to 1910, and then the Palmer family from 1911 to 1935. There was subsequently a division of the garden rooms. We don't know exactly when, but we think it was during the Palmer family ownership. They were certainly there by 1918, I believe. So here you're seeing on this map the gardens divided into these specific garden rooms. So this was the bones these were the bones into which we would weave a new and contemporary horticultural story based on the programming of the J Heritage Center that Suzanne just walked us through. Also, under the Devereux family ownership in 1947, a swimming pool was constructed in what we call Garden 2. By 1927, the path that was a central axis had already been diverted in the second garden room to be a perimeter path around along a large green, and then by 1947, the swimming pool was built. You can see it there in the bottom left with its awesome bright blue. We decided maybe that wasn't super awesome for the future. So, but you can see it also, it's built on a slope. So it has this flush condition on the upper end, and then it's out of the ground on the lower end, and as it is today. In order to meet code and regulations, any body of water more than 2 feet deep triggers pool code. So self-closing doors, high gates, fences, all that sort of thing. So by keeping the shape, the size, and the form, but filling it up to where it's only 2 feet deep, it qualifies as a fountain. So it's now a reflecting pool. But the spatial construct of it will feel very familiar to the historic eye. Room 3, the arbor room, we had enough documentation that we could actually do a recreation of the arbor. So the detailing of the arbor came directly from magnifying glasses on these photographs. And miraculously, just in the year since it's been planted, the roses are already having a real robust showing. So this sort of cheat sheet helps us decipher the walls. You see the long yellow ha-ha wall that was the first wall built, 1822, and that was the Peter Augustus J wall that I was mentioning earlier. And then you can see the 1917 cross walls that divide the garden into 3 different garden rooms. So let's take a quick tour via slide, and then we'll fill your glasses and we'll take you in person through the garden. So the first garden, the parterre garden, this is a mixed garden because of because of the agricultural heritage of the site. This is meant to be a mix of a pleasure garden with the very formal parterres that we have photographic evidence of their shape, their dimension, their size. So we were able to do the very formal sort of entrance threshold, acknowledging that era. But within the same garden, the second half of it is a productive garden of vegetables. We intentionally, because of the archaeological record that we deeply respect, and we did not do extensive archaeology to exhume the entire garden to see what remains of perhaps Native American or African American or colonial settlement there might be, we've built, you'll see, above the ground. So we've lifted in raised beds, and it's just a caution to you, back to that first statement, the land is full. Whatever you're working on in your personal lives, station identification, whatever you're working on, and you say, oh, we have this empty site right here, we'll just put whatever. Before you slam something down on this earth, please call an archaeologist or somebody to look at that ground. And one of the real old school tricks before we had these fabulous LiDAR surveys is to park a few cars at night and shine them across the site, and you will see miracles. You will see footprints of buildings, you'll see traces of old roads. So just taking your site becomes more compelling and exciting when you learn these historic traces that are inside, when you learn the land's story. So just have to say that. So out of respect for the archaeological record, we built on top of the ground. This was the site at the beginning. Some of you may remember the state of things. These are quite funny. The very tall, skinny spruce so often will go to historic sites, and you'll see hemlocks planted 3 feet apart, and they're 50 feet tall. And people are like, what do we do with them? And I'm like, well, they were a hedge that someone neglected. So chances are this was a hedge that hedge gone wild, we call it. And this, of course, is what we've been able, with this incredible army of collaborators and participants, to bring into being. So what you're seeing is that parterre garden as the threshold, then an open space for small gatherings, for classes, as Suzanne said, a didactic landscape, a place of teaching and learning. And then you're seeing the raised bed vegetables. These photographs were from October, so you're seeing it in its more red, russet, brown, and gold phase. Today you're going to see it in its pink, lavender, and blue phase. So we want it to be exciting and interesting in all seasons. But for a newly planted garden in October, thank goodness for that miraculous sky. It was fairly photogenic. And so here you are with the golds, the reds, and the russety seed heads of grasses. The walls were not restored as part of this scope. Our scope really was a horticultural scope, cultural landscape report, history, care with what we put back in horticulturally, but there were not the funds to restore all of the walls. So they still need some love. But here is that didactic landscape at work, the vegetable gardens in production, and then, of course, in winter, just stunning. You see the bones of the garden are revealed in the starkness of winter. I absolutely love gardens in winter. It's my favorite time to visit a beautiful garden. And then the plant palettes, we've posted signs with all of the plants per garden so that you can look at the plants that are blooming. There are many, many labels. There are no peonies, even though there are lots of peony labels. Peonies aren't there yet, but they will be. So, just trying to trick you. And then, so now let's move to the reflecting pool. This central garden, it has one remaining historic tree, the Japanese maple, and this was the state of things when we arrived. This is like the best before and after possible, because there you have it now. I think it's really it's an unusual. I love the sloping ground around this pool with its embedded end and its lifted end, and the beautiful Japanese maple, and then Hallelujah Sky right there with its benediction. And this is looking back up the long axis. And remember, I said in 1927 the axis was broken with the perimeter path, and then later the pool in 49. These are students from Columbia University Preservation Program that came to visit the garden. So already it's working as this place of learning. And I hope, and I think Suzanne's dream also, is that perhaps this could set a standard for the respectful treatment of a contemporary landscape in a historic context. Again, the plant palette really trying to hit 4 seasons of interest, color, these big pulses of blooms. And then the last garden is the arbor garden. Here you can see the very sad state of things, early days. And the photograph that I referenced earlier with the completed construction of the arbor below. So a very accurate, in the Department of the Interior standards, if you have a lot of information like drawings or accurate photographs, you can do a reconstruction as opposed to, we didn't have the remains to do a restoration. So this was a great opportunity to actually put back something with the details that we knew from the photographs. And there it is, but much better today, much more filled out even. And this wonderful structure receiving the final spine. The idea of this garden was also to show these beds. There had been, like storm windows for starting plants. Cold frames. There have been cold frames in this garden. And so we thought, well, what about a series of rectangular beds? We don't want to just make too much of a horticultural obligation of maintenance. So we did these rectangular bands that some of which are grass for now, but all of which could be planted later on. But this garden is cultivating beautiful companion plants that love each other. They occur naturally together. So one might come to that garden and say, I want to have native plants. I want to have native plants that thrive in and around rye, and what looks great together. So it really is almost a box of beautiful native watercolors that you can go and think about where you might live and lessons that you can take from this garden. So this is part of the positive radiating influence of the Jay Heritage site in this didactic lens. It's also a bridge to the meadow. So imagine meadow plants at night hopping the deer fence, crawling down into the garden, and putting their roots down in these beds. It really is almost the formalization of those plants into these drifts from which you can see over the ha-ha wall to the beautiful meadow that Larry Weiner and Associates Landscape Architects have done for this incredible project. So now back at the very entrance of the garden, when you go over the steps, you will be greeted by this fanfare of flowers. I wanted to end on this slide just with a nod to the fact that gardens are ongoing, they're ever evolving, they're ever changing. They are not static constructs. They're just like us. They're born, they die, they pass on what they know to others. They pass on the seed bank, and they require tremendous stewardship. So everyone under this, I'm going to say canvas, has shared in the making of this garden. And it has been a tremendous honor for MBW to be part of this experience. The walls, as I mentioned, need love. They need help. There are many projects ahead, so we can toast our achievement and toast to the future stewards of this beautiful, wonderful place. Thank you so much. Thank you. Larry, would you be able to come up and just tell us a little bit about, I kind of set you up at that last garden as the meadow garden.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for the great work you've done and contributed to here. I'll make this real brief because I know we're here to celebrate the opening of the garden, but I really want to reiterate what Thomas said. First of all, congratulations to all of your team that designed this, and I've known Suzanne for quite a while now and have been kind of in awe of what she gets done. We work with a lot of nonprofits, and there's a lot of variation between talk and stuff actually happening in the real world, and stuff happens in the real world here. So congratulations to Suzanne and her folks. Yeah. And thanks for your eloquent description of what went into this garden. So I'll just say a couple words about the meadow. What you're seeing out here currently was all from seed. You're mostly seeing native sedges planted from seed. Little blue stem, which is a beautiful native grass that comes up late in the season. If you're walking out on the path, there's a nice path that walks along the edge between the garden and the meadow. You can see, if you kind of look down into it, little blue grasses coming up. They're what are called native warm season grasses. They come up late in the year when it gets hot. You're seeing a little bit of them now, but last year they had a major presence. Really a beautiful grass. Another aspect that's quite interesting that we were interested in observing once the deer fence went in was the difference between active deer predation and lack thereof within the fence. And you can see it from here. You'll see it much better when you walk down there if you haven't already had. The two plants that are blooming extensively within the fence are hairy beard tongue, or Penstemon digitalis, and spiderwort, the blue flower, which is Tridescantia virginica, and Tridescantia ohioensis, a different one. And you see some scattered Penstemon, the hairy beard tongue out here, but nowhere near within. So it's really a good example of how the deer are altering our landscape. Typically, I've considered, and this comes from experience, not just conjecture, that meadows have been pretty deer-resistant compositions, not because there are not a lot of plants that they will eat. You can see they've eaten Tridescantia and Penstemon, but because they tend to be intermingled with plants that they don't like, and they can't get them out. For instance, all of the grasses and sedges they don't really eat. And once they come up heavier, the flowers that they will eat in between, they can't get a mouthful of what they like without one that they don't like. Clearly what occurred here is the Penstemon and the Tridescantia came up before the grasses, and consequently they were just by themselves and able to be eaten. But you can see all of the same seed mix was planted out here as in the interior of the fence. And I also want to give kudos to Marley Milano, who is on our team and is our boots in the ground and eyes in the landscape in New York State and Connecticut. She's based in Croton-on-Hudson. We're based in Philadelphia. The last thing I want to mention, Thomas was talking about vegetative interaction between the garden that NBW designed in our meadow, and that is something that was part of the design. What you're seeing out here is all seed, as I mentioned. There was another overlay in our plan of live plants, which were designed, some of which were designed as peninsulas kind of radiating out from the garden. Thomas described it very eloquently. I forget the words you used, but it was very eloquent in terms of how they were finding their way, escaping from the garden and into the meadow. And so that's a future layer that will go down the live plant part of it. And so thank you very much for all the work you've done here. And I encourage you to head out and see what's happening out there.
All right, so you're going to hear more about peas. Again, partnerships, not just with not-for-profit organizations, but also with government officials. And I would like to welcome and recognize two government officials. We have Steve Otis, our New York State Assemblyman, and also Daniel McKay, who is the Deputy Parks Commissioner, New York State Parks Commissioner for Historic Resources. And both of them have been with this project as long as I have, from the very, very beginning. So it is so exciting to have them here to see the transformation, and we couldn't have done it without them. Steve and Daniel both, New York State Parks and Steve, incredibly important because they helped us apply for a $500,000 REDC grant, which was the keystone to this project. And then thanks to many of you in the audience, we raised an additional $1 million. So these gardens represent $1.5 million worth of a public-private partnership agreement and a partnership and that's what made it happen. You cannot do it without these partners and partnerships. And so I would like to introduce Daniel to say a couple of words.
Good afternoon. It's a busy day in the New York State Park System. I was at an event this morning up in Albany, which is conveniently where I could live, and that's what delayed my arrival down here. And so I missed the full presentation, but it is what I caught is, of course, totally stimulating and informative and much appreciated. There are awards to be won. Damn, Susan. I mean, it looks gorgeous online. It's going to look gorgeous in person in just a few moments. But please let me invite you to apply for a state preservation award from our office. I get to decide that. I'm very happy to give you a sense that this looks well earned. The Preservation League of New York State, they have this is award winning. I can tell you that already. It's award-winning not just because of the technical accomplishment here and the stewardship that it represents, but it's award-winning because it is about the partnership between Westchester County government, state government, the New York State Legislature, which provides critical funding, and the J Heritage Center, the not-for-profit that in this case operates with a remarkable amount of, quite intentionally, with a remarkable amount of autonomy and freedom. We have a historic site network in New York State that 35 state historic sites. They all have friends groups of one site or partnering organizations of one type or another. Some are affiliate sites such as this that operate with a slightly larger orbit, with a little bit more autonomy. And Suzanne has utilized that autonomy and that arrangement to achieve great things here. This is certainly evidence of one of them, of some of that freedom to pursue projects, to prioritize, to bring things to completion. But let me say, it's not just the stewardship of the historic assets here, but it's the stewardship of the stories that this facility, that this site can tell. And I think the programming that's happening here, whether it's online with now an international reach or on site, in its many, many formats, whether it's camps, whether it's lectures and events such as this, the programming here is as progressive and forward-looking as any in the system. And that's a credit to Suzanne, that's a credit to her staff. It's where the rest of the agency would like to be. telling untold stories, telling whole history. And you were there already here because of Suzanne, your leadership, the support of the board, the support of membership, and we are greatly appreciative. You are setting a standard, once again, for the state park system, and it's the partnership, it's the outside partnership that is achieving that with us, achieving that for us, and we are. That's why I come down from Albany. That's why I'm so happy to be here. Suzanne and I have known each other for probably 17, 18 years. I met her when she was a board member at the Preservation League of New York State. We met on annual lobby visits to the New York State congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. She was quite insistent that the historic site story be part of the narrative that the Preservation League, and at that time the State Preservation Office's participation, brought to Washington, told to representatives about the critical funding and the critical interrelationship between public and private partners. She was such a fierce advocate for this site. She has been all along. You know that perhaps better than I do. I'm 2.5 hours distance from it, but I do get to see it, and that's why I was so pleased to make the time to attend. So on behalf of Governor Hochul, who was also invited but could attend, on behalf of Commissioner Kulisade, who nearly came but had a late emerging conflict, who would have been happy to be here for this, I just want to congratulate you on this remarkable achievement. I want to thank you for the continued stewardship of story and site. I will note, perhaps a bit technical, but we are at the end of the license agreement period that allows Jay Heritage Center to operate in partnership with New York State. Suzanne and I have been talking. I've been talking with the other members of the executive staff. So there's a three-way agreement, Westchester County, New York State Parks, Jay Heritage Center. That agreement expires at the end of the calendar year, or maybe just thereafter. We want to get it done before the end of the calendar year so that we can have this partnership in place for the next generation of projects, of stewardship, of care. And so we are going to be making that a priority, administrative priority on our end over the next 4 or 5 months. I think we can get it done efficiently and quickly. Sometimes not something you always associate with state government, but we'll make that a priority. And I think the final thing I want to say is that, from Albany, I mean, sometimes there's an interesting gap. The distance can sometimes create a bit of a gap. And so I know this site well on paper. I can tell you that it's one of 206 National Register listed properties in Westchester County. I can tell you that it's one of 160 National Historic Landmarks in New York State. I can tell you it's one of 16 National Historic Landmark properties in the state park system. But I think what's really important for me to realize, I have started to see this as the pandemic has lifted and visitation has picked up even further over record levels, and I've been able to be out in the field more, despite all of those national designations and accolades. This is a park of local import. This is a park of local concern and visitation. This is your local park and historic site. And I've learned, again, particularly as we crawl out of the pandemic, the power of having an association, an opportunity to visit this site, an association with this site that builds to a commitment to this site, the power of this being a local facility. It surpasses any designation or recognition that I could talk about from a technical or bureaucratic or programmatic perspective. It's so impressive as a local asset for Westchester County and for Rye itself. So I just want to thank you for being here. I'm glad the rain has been held at bay. We're going to get a great look at the garden. I was here before any of this got touched. Those before pictures were very familiar. And I know, as I said, there are awards to be won. Please come apply for them. So thank you very much.
Hi there, all. I'm Steve Otis, the State Assemblyman, former Mayor of Rye. And I just want to give a little historical perspective. We've heard so much, but this is really a story of audacious optimism and vision. Because back in the 1980s when this property was at risk, the vision was not just to save the important buildings that are of architectural importance and of historic note, but it was also the natural resources of the property. And so back then, Kitty Oresti and Dee Dee Pascal and Sharon Du Bois and Rhoda Kornreich, and just honored here, who passed away recently, Jane Moffat, and others worked with a vision that encompassed the whole natural resources of the property. And so then the property was saved, and the question was, well, let's understand the resources. And I hold in my hand, done in the late 90s and early 2000s, the cultural landscape report for the J property and for marshlands. And so this wasn't just to do history. When I say ambitious and audacious, the idea was, and these were the discussions, a lot of the meetings happened in that building right behind there. The idea was, we're going to do this study because maybe one day we'll be able to recreate gardens with the vision of the history that came here before. And that is what the plan that you developed was informed by this research. And so to think back into 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, the thought was, yeah, one day somehow this is going to happen. Who would have thought that that would be possible? And Daniel McKay, here for State Parks. State Parks has been a partner from saving this property and everything that's happened since for decades, going back to the 80s. And one of your predecessors, Julie Stokes, who I worked with, and she would say, well, you know, if we help you save this property, how do we know that people are going to like really follow through and fix things up and pay attention to it? Well, thanks to Suzanne Clary, thanks to all of the members of the board and the volunteers and the people that have generously donated to make this possible over the years, there is no doubt in the idea that State Parks has about the ability of this community to do great things here. So about Suzanne and about this vision, she never let up in terms of the fact that we're going to make these gardens happen. And like many of you, I walked through here when they were just growth and things are falling apart. And the idea that this history lives again and educates. One last thing, as was the case with the restoration of the buildings, the project of restoring the parks, the gardens, has been an educational function all along the way. The public has been involved and has been enriched by the process of doing this. This is an amazing day. This is a joyous day. We're going to go down there and take a look. But the question is, how long does it take to grow a garden? It takes a long time. And you all have done it. Congratulations. This is a great day.